Thanks for taking the time to do this again, man. I really appreciate it. I mean, I wanted to do something a little different for dude you haven't played this game this time around, so I hope you don't mind that I'm stealing a page from your stuff.
Hey, no way, dude. Happy to help.
Yeah, except we should probably fill him in on the bet this time around.
Bet? What bet?
Well, each year we do a playthrough for a game, and whoever gets the farthest wins. But since we're playing a fighting game, it'll be whoever loses both matches.
We'll each fight you in Castlevania Judgment since you love it so much. And if you lose, well, you'll see.
Psh, after all the time that I've spent with this game, you know you're going down. Come on. No. Oh, man. Damn. Can't believe I lost to both of you. Alright. Oh, what are the terms to this stupid bet anyways? What a horrible night to lose a bet! Man, what's with this outfit? Oh yeah, I remember.
You're not gonna like this. At all.
You have to dress as the main character of the next game you review. During your review.
But the next game that I'm reviewing is Haunting Ground for the PlayStation 2. Oh no.
Have fun. Make sure to wear plenty of makeup.
Alright, let's get this over with. Here's Haunting Ground. Released in 2005 toward the later part of the PlayStation 2's life cycle, Haunting Ground is a title which slipped through the cracks amongst a graveyard full of disturbingly creative survival horror games for the system. This is a title that's got more in common with games like Clock Tower, Kuon, Rule of Rose, Silent Hill, and Fatal Frame, rather than Capcom's other survival horror mega franchise, Resident Evil. While the game has some frustrating missteps in design, it's these characteristics that bring a dark, demented, and disturbingly sexual title to the most twisted game I've played in a while for all the strangest reasons. While this is a game that may not be for everyone, those up for a unique experience in the survival horror genre should seek entrance to its castle walls with this thriller. Haunting Ground, or Demento as it's known in Japan, takes its inspiration from Japanese and European psychological horror movies, such as Sweet Home, Suspiria, and Creepers, but mixes it with the flavorings in slasher movies such as Halloween. While Creepers was a direct inspiration to titles like Human Entertainment's Clock Tower, Haunting Ground feels more like an amalgamation of a large library of horror, wrapped in a sadistic, terrifyingly sexual experience that's perfect for the Halloween season. Back in 2001, Capcom actually took over the development of the Clock Tower franchise with the third installment in the series. However, the title's focus on puzzle solving and its panic meter was in its infancy in Clock Tower 3, so they decided to create a more fleshed out game without the Clock Tower name that elaborated on these gameplay elements with an all-new story and cast of characters. While Haunting Ground is a superior title to Clock Tower 3, the game isn't without its own problems that cause tensions to run high in both good and bad ways. What am I talking about? Well, you'll see. You play as Fiona Belly, an 18-year-old British girl who wakes up in a dog cage practically naked. Ah, now I get why I woke up in that cage. And here I thought it was just another Friday night. She sees something blur by her, then after escaping, she picks up a collar that says Huey on it. Fiona begins to stumble around the castle, and this is about the time where you begin to see how the controls work. She starts having vague recollections, remembering what happened just before your capture, and you find that you're in a giant mansion. Now, I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but I'll try my best to describe it as spoiler-free as I can. Fiona's parents are involved with the mansion's owners in a very specific way, one which I can't divulge as it ruins everything. But there are loads of supernatural, scientific, astrological, and alchemy-based events occurring which drive the plot forward and even influence the puzzles you will face. Fiona is a carrier of something called the Azoth. Essentially, everyone wants a piece of it. There's a total of 4 enemies in the game: Debilitas the groundskeeper, Daniela the maid, Ricardo the creeper, and the man with the hidden agenda, Lorenzo. You meet one of the 4 villains right away, who is the maid of the castle, Daniela. She has a cold presence about her, something you'll discover more as the game goes on. As you slip into these rather tight garments that she provides you with, you start to realize that you're not alone in these giant hallways. You meet Debilitas.
No, that's Sloth from the Goonies.
Okay, fair enough. You meet Sloth from the Goonies. No, Debilitas may share a visual inspiration from the aforementioned character, but he is much more sinister and twisted. A mentally disturbed character who also happens to be physically deformed, this tall, lurching hulk thinks Fiona is one of his dolls and will haunt you for most of your stay in the beginning of these castle walls. The game relies heavily on controlling both Fiona and the previously mentioned owner of the collar she found, Huey. Huey is a white German shepherd who Fiona discovers and rescues, saving him from the nasty jaws of life that he's been trapped in. However, she gives him 0 first aid, so we're led to believe he just magically heals?
I don't know, video game logic?
You control Fiona with the left analog or D-pad, though you'll want to stick with the analog on this one, as the game controls more like the modern day Resident Evil games, specifically the remake for the GameCube or Resident Evil Code Veronica for the Dreamcast. They're not quite tank-like controls from the original titles in that series, but the shift in camera angles is done so that it throws off your perspective. You may start to panic and change the direction you're moving your character in to match what you see visually, prompting lots of awkward missteps. It's not a terrible system, just a flawed one that can really frustrate at points, but more on that later. Pre-rendered backgrounds have an interesting feel to them this time around, as the camera has this zoom feature that pulls the focus in and out depending on which frame you move into. It's a cool graphical trick that earlier survival horror titles could have taken serious advantage of, but I think it works better in a more psychological horror game such as what we have here. Your right analog stick is only used for controlling Huey.
Hey, your name is Harley. I know you're a Siberian Husky and all, but that's pretty close to a German Shepherd. Maybe if I...
Controlling Huey can be a chore, but in all the right ways. Bear with me here. Depending on the action you choose to move with using the right analog, you can either tell Huey to follow you, make him attack, have him fetch for you, or even sit in a specific spot. Though for that, you'll need a working PS2 controller to do that with. I thought the game was broken until I learned that the R3 button on my controller had stopped working. You can use Huey to solve puzzles and fetch items that are beyond your reach, typically with a simple flick of the right analog in the appropriate direction. Unless you've played the game before, you'll mosey through the castle rooms, occasionally touching upon instant death traps. Typically, this happens when solving puzzles. It's a bit like Tomb Raider, where something you can trigger can lead to your death. The frustrating part is that unless you save constantly, you may get too into the game and wind up dying and having to start way back at an earlier scene. My advice is to focus on saving every time you see the grandfather clocks. There's unlimited saving in the game, so feel free to save whenever you can. Well, that is, unless you're being chased. I'll begin to get really into trying to solve the puzzles, which typically involve Fiona collecting keys or items and bringing them to another location, again, similar to Resident Evil. Bring this item here, twist it just the right way, step on this switch, command Huey over there, and so on. Some of the puzzles get very tricky and require some hyper-observance and focus to be able to solve. What makes these puzzles more challenging is that the villains, depending on which section of the game you're in, chase Fiona and are sometimes very difficult to hide from. A large majority of the game is entering into a new area and then running through the castle, skipping everything you see that could be a clue or item just to get away from them. Your main focus is getting away from the evil that often lurks just behind you. See, the game isn't action oriented, so fighting back consists of a well-placed running shove or kick from Fiona. You can command Huey to attack, but I didn't want to hurt the relationship between Fiona and Huey, which can affect how he feels about Fiona later in the game. The more you send him to attack, the riskier it can be, and it really is important to build that relationship early on with lots of treats, playing fetch with the ball you find, and showing him lots of love by flicking the right analog stick to the right. This can affect the ending of the game, so if you're mean to Huey, it will risk achieving the bad ending.
Besides, what kind of a monster would hurt a poor little puppy like Huey anyways? I mean, Harley. I mean, Huey. Nobody I want to be friends with, that's for sure.
Huey doesn't always listen. If you own a dog, you know how difficult it can be to train one, and what's even more impressive is the developers nailed the behaviors of the dog. Sometimes it takes several tries to get Huey to do as you command, or he'll get lost and you'll have to go find him to make sure he's following behind. Here's an example. I need him to grab me these flowers in a spot I can't reach so I can put them in the vase to get these moths away. The flowers will wilt if you take your time bringing them back, so you have to be quick. But Huey needs to be told a few times, depending on the relationship with him, to go grab the flowers. This can be agonizing if you don't have the patience for it, so you can't treat this dog like a main character that you control, you have to treat him like a dog. It's one of the rare examples of an extremely faithful AI for an animal in a video game. While this makes it frustrating for the player at first, it's not something I'm going to fault the game for, as the relationship takes time to build. But when it does, Huey is the perfect companion. Just tread carefully when giving commands and try not to accidentally kick Huey while breaking pots to collect items or when attacking. Remember, lots of treats. The items you collect either have a direct purpose or they are meant to be used and learned from. You have your specialty items and your standard items. Specialty items can only be used in certain spots that will trigger action events like doors unlocking or advancements to the puzzles and story. Regular items either list exactly what they are, some of which can aid in attacking your pursuers, or you'll gather an unknown item through the item creation process. This was the part of the game that I found severely lacking. You collect medallions which you bring to this machine that allows you to a chance to pick from rotating colors. If enough colors are combined, it creates an item, but if you fail, you lose the medallion and have to find another one. Now they're spread around pretty well, but it kinda reminds me of Bugs Bunny's Birthday Blowout for the NES, where you have to just mash on the button and hope for the best. The items you collect are sometimes listed as mystery items that have a use, but you may not be aware of what they do until you actually use it. Sometimes you'll find definitions of what items do, but this level of hyper-realism in a video game is not my cup of tea. I know that's a bit odd to say considering my previous praise of the animal artificial intelligence, but there are some things I don't want to take a guess on, and items are one of them. I would have preferred the game have me find a book that would allow me to look up every single item I can collect right off the bat, but that's just me. I mean, really, there are items like the onion, which is meant for Huey, like I'm going to give a dog an onion. Pure poison. Pressing the select button allows you to bring up some helpful and not so helpful menus. There's a section called Comments which reads like a diary with helpful clues to the puzzles and things to remember. There's your key items and regular items, the controls which can be altered at any time, and probably the least helpful section, the map. The gripe I have with the map is it's just too small and there's no zoom option. Just completely skip using the map, it's a huge waste of space. Back to the puzzles, probably the most nerve-wracking part of the game is trying to solve puzzles while being chased. You begin to get into a groove of getting the items you need to get when all of a sudden one of the baddies will be right around the corner and you'll need to spend a very long time evading them. Sometimes I begin to hear the music of the chase beginning and I just get so discouraged because I was about to solve a puzzle, but then I have to try to find a good spot to hide in. You can hide in various spots like under beds, sofas, closets, and even Iron Maidens.
Iron Maiden, excellent!
Now you can't hide if you're being seen, just like the fact that you can't solve puzzles while you're being chased. If you hide in the same spot too many times, they will catch on and you'll need to switch it up. Ducking with the L1 button can also help send the enemy on a wild goose chase if you're hidden, but not always. During the chase, Fiona may begin to panic, thus bringing up her adrenaline and bringing down her stamina. She'll begin to slow down if she's caught too many times, which can result in a complete meltdown involving tons of crazy visual effects that distort not only the image on the screen, but also the controls as well. Fiona will begin to run dramatically faster, causing her to trip and fall, and bump into almost anything in her path. You can try to control her, but it's a complete struggle until she calms down enough for you to regain control. There are items that can bring your stamina back up and your panic back down, but they are rarely available and they don't necessarily work immediately. That's kind of my gripe with the items though. Too many items I didn't use and not enough explanation about what they can do. If I'm in a pinch and try something I have no idea about, it could help or hinder. Anyways, if you get caught too many times, it's game over, and well... Part of the allure of Haunting Grounds horror is mostly psychological, but also involving an almost predatory atmosphere. Thanks to some impressive sound effects, things are alluded to but not quite explained, and it makes it all the more frightening. Is that a tearing of flesh or clothing? Is that someone eating her? The camera knows when and where to show gore, and it does so tastefully. Haunting Ground almost never dilutes these themes down with straight up gross horror motifs. There's an overwhelming amount of bizarre sexuality hinted at towards Fiona that makes the player not be able to look away, but at the same time, because so little is shown, it makes players yearn to discover more about the plot of the game and how Fiona is involved. Sometimes it's very subtle, and other times...
Let me into your womb!
Don't I at least get dinner and a movie first? Honestly.
She gets groped by Daniela, she's almost nude in a cage in the beginning, and the developers made sure to toss in tons of breast jiggle mechanics and even make Fiona self-aware that she's in a shirt that's too tight for her chest. You can't help but feel like you're leering yourself during this vulgar display of voyeurism. However, I'd say it goes beyond the typical trope of a hot blonde damsel in distress by making the player sink themselves into the role, which makes the player all the more eager to escape this horrible castle and save Fiona from this nightmare. Later, the plot becomes more detailed and gives away more backstory to how Fiona's family fits in with Ricardo and later Lorenzo. The story isn't too contrived and is a ghastly reminder that you may not know all the skeletons hidden in people's closets.
I hear footsteps. Oh man, I totally forgot. I told Ed we'd record Pixel Tunes Radio tonight. I can't let him see me like this. I have to hide.
Dude, why are you dressed like a girl? I thought we were going to record an episode of Pixel Tunes Radio tonight.
I lost a bet to MichaelBTheGameGenie and WeekendGameGuy, so now I have to dress up like the character for the game that I was reviewing. You know, Haunting Ground, Fiona Belly.
You look like Kirby got drunk and ate Fiona Belly.
Okay, Ed.
You're like the girl that showed up to the prom wearing the same dress as the hot girl, but you ate the hot girl.
Okay, Ed.
It's like David Bowie's character from Labyrinth had a baby with Miss Piggy and Swamp Thing.
Okay, Ed. All right, come on. Let's just go record Pixel Tunes Radio. Welcome to Pixel Tunes Radio, a podcast where we have fun talking about video games and video game music. I'm Fiona.
And I can't do this.
Call me.
Later in the game you meet Ricardo, who looks suspiciously like your father, and Lorenzo, who takes various forms. Again, without spoiling it all, it's really hard to go into further detail about these two characters, as the first two enemies take on a more psycho-killer role, whereas the plot begins to advance further when you learn who Ricardo and Lorenzo are. Let's just say things are not always what they seem. The difficulty in the later part of the game is through the roof, and when the game begins to force you to use more attacks and strategies to combat the bad guys, the more we can see the faults with this title. While I enjoyed my playthrough of Haunting Ground, it doesn't change the fact that this is not an action game. So when action is required, it's often stiff and jarring. The creators also thought it would be a good idea to insert moments that later on become completely time-consuming when you don't have time. At one point late in the game, you've got to kneel down during earthquakes, then get up, run a bit, kneel again, and so on, all while staying ahead of the enemy. When a statue falls on Fiona, you've got just enough time to lift it back into place. These moments make you start to panic in real life, so the game does a great job at transitioning Fiona's fear into your own. I'd say it's worth struggling through these parts to complete the game. Haunting Ground's music and sound effects are particularly pleasing when it comes to the aesthetics. There's not a lot to write home about regarding the soundtrack, but its creepy atmosphere and occasionally brash use of electronics and static voices makes a solid effort to build a spooky soundtrack that's perfect for the game's visuals. The sound effects are perfect in most cases and fit the horrific visuals. I had some problems with the graphics in this game. Not that they were bad, but the art design between CG cutscenes and the in-game engine, specifically for Fiona, did not match at times. Sometimes her face just looks off, particularly in the earlier cutscenes. This is a visually dark game. I would have appreciated a bit more use of color, as some parts of the castle all blended in with one another. Grass and plants often look brown and matched with the ground. Sometimes you can barely see Fiona as she tends to blend in with the backgrounds a bit. Castle walls on the inside and outside were often devoid of personality, leaving the rooms inside the castle to pick up the visual slack. With pre-rendered backgrounds, it was always difficult to tell where items were unless they flickered. Sometimes it looked like you could move or break something, but you couldn't, so I would oftentimes walk around and keep hitting the circle button to inspect everything. It felt at times like playing Doom and trying to find all the little treats and traps hidden among the levels. Even Huey gets in on the hidden item action if you let him search in some spots. This can sometimes be tedious, but it may be worth your while as you'll discover something very helpful, so use those kicks and search options to your advantage. I thought the range of emotions that Fiona's face displayed were really impressive for its time, especially the in-game cutscenes. If you're looking for a disturbing game to play this Halloween, and you've been through the Resident Evils and the Silent Hills, and you're looking for something that kind of merges the two together with some of the smaller franchises such as Clock Tower or Fatal Frame, then I would definitely recommend Haunting Ground. The game's gained notoriety over the past few years, and because of it, the game is now one of the most expensive titles on the PS2. For those who have the cash or can find it cheap, it's worth hunting down. Please tread carefully though, for if you are looking for a survival horror title with a heavier influence of Resident Evil, you'll want to stay far away, as this game requires a dedication to patience and takes substance over style. It's a creeping, slow experience with moments of panic and frustration that has its place half in the past of survival horror games, yet half in a modern era of intense realism and focus. There's a secret room you can unlock simply by beating the game, which allows you to listen to music, watch movies, check out animations and concept art, and even has a short minigame, which I didn't spend much time with. So there's tons of replay value to be able to see all endings, both good and bad. While some of the game relies too heavy on voyeuristic objectification, it works well for the story and characters that the game tries to craft, and it pulls it off quite well. Though some of the unlockable costumes for Fiona are definitely, interesting?
Well, that does it for another year of spooky fun for the Halloween season. You know, I'm glad that I was able to break away from the traditional Castlevania review that I do. And best of all, I didn't have to see that jerk Dracula. Hey, I wonder what the guys thought of my costume, though. Guys?
My eyes!
Is it over?
Psh, please, you guys know I'm gorgeous. Happy Halloween, everyone!